Now the serpent was more subtle than any animal of the field which Yahweh God had made. He said to the woman, "Has God really said, 'You shall not eat of any tree of the garden'?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat the fruit from the trees of the garden, but not the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden. God has said, 'You shall not eat of it, you shall not touch it, lest you die.'" The serpent said to the woman, "You won't really die, for God knows that in the day you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took some of its fruit and ate. And then she gave some to her husband, and he ate it too. Their eyes were opened, and they both knew that they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. They heard Yahweh God's voice walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of Yahweh God among the trees of the garden. Yahweh God called to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" The man said, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid myself." God said, "Who told you you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" The man said, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit from the tree, and I ate it." Yahweh God said to the woman, "What have you done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." Yahweh God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, you are cursed above all livestock, and above every animal of the field. You shall go on your belly, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life. I will put hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will bruise your head, and you will bruise his heel." To the woman he said, "I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. You will bear children in pain. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." To Adam he said, "Because you have listened to your wife's voice, and have eaten from the tree, about which I commanded you, saying, 'You shall not eat of it,' the ground is cursed for your sake. You will eat from it with much labor all of your life. It will yield thorns and thistles to you, and you will eat the herb of the field. You will eat bread by the sweat of your face, until you return to the ground, for you were taken out of it. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return." The man called his wife Eve, because she would be the mother of all the living. Yahweh God made garments of animal skins for Adam and for his wife, and clothed them. Yahweh God said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach his hand out, and also take of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever." Therefore Yahweh God sent him out from the Garden of Eden, to till the ground from which he was taken. So he drove the man out, and he placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword, which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. That was Genesis chapter 3, The Temptation and Fall of Man, or Forbidden Fruit Snacks, from the World English Bible, a free public domain translation of the Bible, without which this study would not be possible. So thank you very much to them. Hi, I'm Gail, and I want to thank you for joining me today on the Secular Scriptures. If you just came for the reading and don't want to stick around for the discussion, feel free to hop off to the next video. If you'd like to stay for some analysis, you are most welcome. I'd like to remind everyone that this is a secular study of the Bible, so please refrain from proselytizing or wading into the murky waters of apologetics. I'm not a Bible scholar. I just love these stories. Discussion in the comments is welcome. Fighting is not. Please keep it civil. Different translations say different things, so please list the translation you're using if you quote a passage. No disparaging somebody's preferred book. I like the NRSV. And keep it on topic. The topic today is the temptation, fall, and expulsion of man, aka God fires his gardeners. If you want more of this type of biblical analysis, I highly recommend Mindshift's playlist Secular Bible Study, especially for his Genesis commentary on culpability. His videos are from an ex-evangelical agnostic perspective. For more world mythology, I highly recommend Craigenfort by John F. White, especially his episodes on the stories of the snake that steals immortality from humans. Genesis 3 is, of course, one of them. Go grab your favorite beverage and let's sort through this tale about the consequences of one's own actions. History. Genesis 3, as it appears today, is a post-exilic work that was compiled and heavily redacted, reaching its final form around 400 BCE. Scholars disagree on who wrote Genesis 3, with it likely being a combination of older elements from the Yahwist and Elohist sources around 900 BCE, pulling elements from both northern and southern traditions, then heavily redacted into one coherent narrative. They did a really good job on blending this Plato. Literary analysis. First we have our characters. God is in the leading role. We have the man, or Adam, in our speaking role, the woman, or Eve, in a speaking role, the serpent in a speaking role, and the cherubim in a non-speaking role. The story is set at the beginning of humanity in a fictional sense, and at the start of early agriculture in the real sense. Man is created to till the earth in chapter 2, but also harkens back to the transition from a gathering lifestyle. Genesis 3 is told via narrator, primarily from the point of view of the man and the woman, and God only appears in the very end among the council of gods here, unlike in chapter 1 and chapter 2, where he is the primary focus of the story. Plot summary. Chapter 3 opens with the serpent questioning the woman about what God told the humans they could and could not eat. She relays that they were told not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or they would die. The serpent refutes that and says God wants to keep wisdom for himself. The woman eats the fruit, doesn't keel over dead, hands some to her husband, he eats it, they realize they're naked, sew fig leaves together to cover their groins. They hide from God. God calls them out and realizes that they've eaten the forbidden fruit snacks. The humans play the blame game, the man blaming the woman and the woman blaming the serpent. God is miffed and curses all three. He makes the snake crawl on the ground and sets up the rivalry between serpents and humans. He tells the woman that she'll have pain in childbirth and must be the servant of the man. He tells the man that the ground is cursed because of him and that he'll have to work hard to grow his food until he dies. Eve gets her name. God makes clothing of animal skins, the first killing. And then God addresses the council of gods and decides to banish the humans so that they don't become immortal. He sets the cherubim at the east of Eden and a flaming sword fence around the tree of life. Chapter 3 is written in the prose narrative, which is a writing style that tells a story using ordinary language. Literary devices. Let's explore some of the literary devices used in Chapter 3. We have two examples of anthropomorphism, which is the attribution of human characteristics or behaviors to a god, animal, or object. In this case, it's the snake speaking to the woman and God appearing in human form as he did in Chapter 2. A simile is a figure of speech involving the comparison of one thing with another thing of a different kind. In Chapter 3, humans become like God by eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I touched on the concept of knowing and being able to choose good and bad in the last episode, and I promised to get to the concept of culpability, which will be in the CCC portion of the video. Dualism is when something is divided into two contrasting parts or aspects. Dualism is the central theme in this story, which explores the complexities of human nature, morality, and the nature of reality itself. Specifically, good versus evil, ostensibly the snake versus God, innocence versus knowledge, pre and post fruit, truth versus lie, represented by the snake and God respectively. And the central theme of the entire story, from here to the end, obedience versus disobedience. There are other literary devices I didn't touch on here. Feel free to add them in the comments below. Because this is the foundational myth in the Abrahamic religions, and because it's become so tangled up with added cultural tradition over the centuries, I think it's important to highlight the key elements that often get lost. This part of the story is designed to answer the question of why is life so hard? In this case, as in many other myths, it's because the gods are punishing humans for some transgression in the distant past. The original sin was disobedience, not nudity. The serpent is just a snake, not Satan or the devil in disguise. We'll cover this theme next in comparative mythology. Comparative mythology. There are three main themes I want to explore here: the serpent and immortality, the tree of wisdom, and divine punishment. We cannot talk about the serpent in Eden without talking about the Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh. In tablets 9 to 11, Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, is on a quest to become immortal after his BFF Enkidu is killed by the gods for their hijinks. He meets Utanapishtim and his wife, the only survivors of the Great Flood, and the only humans to have been granted immortality. And they tell him that gods have kept immortality for themselves and given humans death as their share. They eventually take pity on him and tell him that there is a plant at the bottom of the sea that will make him young again. But after he finds it, he falls asleep and a snake eats it. It sheds its skin, becoming young again, and swims away. There is no malice attached to the serpent in this tale. It's just an animal that found a yummy treat. It answers why the snake sheds its skin. And the moral is that man cannot defeat sleep, much less death. And that we only have one life to live, so we better live it well. Acting as an anchor between this element and the next, we have the story of the snake in the Chinese Zodiac. In this tale, the snake begins life with 4 legs, but allows resentment and anger to get the better of it. And the Jade Emperor, one of the primordial gods, hears the snake's complaints and punishes it by taking away its legs. When the Jade Emperor promises a prize to the winner of the Zodiac race, the snake competes to try to get its legs back. It doesn't win, but gains 6th place in the Zodiac through its wits and is forgiven for past mistakes. Whenever the snake notices anger or resentment building up, it sheds its skin and has a new beginning. The snake embodies wisdom, intuition, charm, and a deep understanding of the world around it. The snake in the Chinese tale has many shared traits with the serpent in Eden, both being beautiful, wise, clever, and both getting their legs taken away for offending God. There are far too many world trees to choose from, so going from the theme of gaining wisdom, we have Yggdrasil, a great and noble ash tree from Norse mythology, which the entire world is built upon, and it is mortal. When Yggdrasil dies, the gods and everything else will die with it. The tree is beset by various evils, including a serpent that gnaws at its roots and a deer that nibbles the leaves. In one tale, the god Odin hangs from the branches of Yggdrasil for 9 nights, pierced with a spear, to gain the wisdom of the runes from the Norns, the 3 divine caretakers of the great tree. Last, we have a tale from Greek mythology about a very clever man who escapes death several times and really pisses off all the gods, earning him a repetitive and pointless task in the afterlife as his punishment. Sisyphus was the king of Corinth and starts off strong by spoiling Zeus's nefarious fun. After Zeus abducts Aegina, daughter of the god Asopus, Sisyphus agrees to tell Asopus where Aegina is if he'll make a spring in Corinth. Asopus agrees, and though Aegina isn't rescued, Zeus is good and mad at Sisyphus for this betrayal. Good on the king, Zeus shouldn't be abducting nymphs, but that's very much in his MO. Sisyphus seduces his niece in order to dethrone his own brother, though she slays their children when she discovers his plot. Greek myth is full of dead kids. Sisyphus cheats death the first time by tricking him and chaining him to a rock. No one can die while death is indisposed, and Ares gets mad because this has spoiled the fun of war. Ares storms off, finds death, and lets him go. When Death comes back to collect our clever king, he tricks his wife into throwing his corpse into the public square, and then pleads with Persephone to let him return to the land of the living, to seek justice for this abuse. He then refuses to go back to the underworld, and finally Hermes is sent to retrieve him in person. Hades is none too happy about Sisyphus making a fool of his beloved and beautiful flower goddess wife, and assigns our clever king the task of rolling a heavy boulder up the hill of Tartarus forever. Once the rock reaches the top, it will roll back down, and King Sisyphus must begin again. At least in this story, only Sisyphus is punished for his actions. Which brings us to conflicts, contradictions, and controversies. Shockingly, there is no conflicting information within this part of the text. Let us raise a toast to the editors for their wondrous skill in bringing the disparate parts of the story together into one cohesive whole. Well, it may potentially slightly conflict with day 6 of creation and the definition of good, but that's a minor quibble. The story of the temptation and the fall, pretty much everything after that too, belies the concept of an all-knowing God versus a surprised-as-heck God. Humans start out disobeying gods because I said so, and pretty much don't stop. This causes the main character no end of frustration, as we'll see over and over again. This was just the first example of the many design flaws in God's perfect creation. Within the text, he clearly knows that he messed up big time and needs to fire the gardener. Going back to my little fan fiction, he did not obey his mother and keep the humans away from the forbidden fruit trees, so now it's time for the new pets to go live outside. We have some conflicts with society and science. We'll start out with the fear of snakes. Setting up thousands of years of ophidiophobia was not cool. While some people are indeed afraid of snakes all on their own, which I'll talk about later, most people are only afraid of them because they've been told to be, specifically by this chapter in this book. Snakes are a valuable part of our environment, and they have a right to exist. They are not evil, they're just reptiles. The loss of the nudist foraging lifestyle in an idyllic climate is no more an individual snake in your yard's fault than it is yours. Don't kill them, just call animal control if you need it relocated. Don't deliberately run over them in the road. It's a horrible death that takes hours or days of suffering and is way more dangerous for people than leaving them be. Mythology is not an excuse for animal cruelty. Under animal communication, a quick note on the talking snake aspects of this story. While snakes don't speak like humans, they don't have the physical equipment to do so, they certainly do have the ability to communicate with each other and with the animals around them. They make various sounds and body movements that have clear meanings. Reptile keepers learn what those sounds and movements mean and how to interact safely with their animals based on that communication. The 20th century brought us new understanding in animal behavior and intelligence, and the new talking buttons have opened up communication with our pets in delightful ways. Unfortunately, for centuries, human exceptionalism has created a serious bias against other animals in Western society and science, which is due directly to this religious belief, and we need to get over that. We are part of this world, not separate from it. Teaching children to ignore the evidence before their eyes, to cater to an ancient creation myth is not cool. Stop that. I promised we'd talk about the concept of culpability. Culpability is the responsibility for a fault or wrong. It's who to blame. There are 4 levels of culpability when determining guilt in the U.S. legal codes: purposefully, knowingly, recklessly, and negligently. Purposeful actions are the highest level of culpability, where someone deliberately and consciously takes a course of action with the intent to cause harm. An example is poisoning someone. Acting knowingly is when someone is aware that their actions are likely to lead to a negative outcome, but they aren't deliberately out to cause harm. An example would be selling illegal drugs. Acting recklessly is when someone takes an unjustifiable risk knowing it could cause harm, but goes ahead anyway. An example is taking illegal drugs for recreational purposes. Negligent actions are when someone should be aware of the risks, but they are not. An example would be leaving illegal drugs where children can access them. I would argue that it is impossible for anyone other than God to act knowingly until after the fruit snacks are nommed on. If someone wants to argue that the serpent is Satan, then maybe that could be deemed a purposeful or knowing action. But there's no indication of that in the text until much later writings backfill that minuscule plot hole with apologetics. In this narrative, it's just a snake. It's a clever or subtle wild animal or beast of the field, depending on your translation. God set himself up for this by lying about how the fruit would kill the humans, and then not taking any other precautions with his curious primates, which is recklessness at least. Was the woman reckless in believing the serpent? Maybe. Did she understand death? There hadn't been one yet. The serpent clearly told the truth. The wisdom fruits did not kill the humans, and they were going to die eventually anyway because they were not made immortal. In point of fact, they were booted from the garden so they would not become immortal. Apparently, the forethought of putting up a flaming sword fence to keep the clever apes out beforehand did not occur to God, which does not bode well for his omniscience. Ultimately, I don't think that the man or the woman could be held responsible for their actions without having been in possession of the knowledge of good and bad first. Can a person without the capacity of understanding obey or disobey? We don't put toddlers in jail for running off with their friends' toys. We explain the action of sharing and the concept of ownership and wait for them to mature into understanding through repeated lessons. We only hold people accountable for their bad actions once they have reached an age and competency level to be held accountable. Someone who runs and hides in the trees like a child who stole a cookie before dinner hiding behind a couch is not culpable. Punishing the humans for eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil before they knew the difference between good and evil is a bit evil. So let's talk about those punishments. The snake loses its legs. This is a cool etiological story, not based on real-world facts. Snakes lost their legs through natural selection over time, but the story itself is fine for what it is. Though the similar tale from China has a happier ending for the poor snake. The animosity between humans and snakes has certainly not gone well for the snakes, but it wasn't initially caused by this myth. The myth certainly didn't help, but the rivalry between primates and serpentes goes back much farther than that. The man is cursed, foreshadowing, and the ground with him, meaning it will grow prickers. This is another etiological explanation for a very natural plant defense, and a way of explaining why it was hard to farm in that area of the world. Cursing the man with work was a giant nothing burger. He had to work in the garden anyway. This is what he was made for. Pain in childbirth is yet another etiological explanation. Humans have increased labor pain because our ancestors decided to walk upright and get smart. On a personal level, I've had worse periods than childbirth. Granted, I've had some doozies of periods, but we have a cultural mythology that says that we should expect birth to be the worst pain ever. Largely because of this story right here, so that increases tension, which increases pain. None of that is to say that having babies doesn't hurt. It does. I'm a farmer. I've seen other critters give birth. It frickin' hurts them too. Humans aren't special. Birth pain isn't because of some ancient curse. It's because of upright hips. Just wait for the back pain to set in your 40s. That gets the guys too. Because human pelvises are dumb. Intelligent design my aching ass. Lastly, let's talk about sexism. This one short story is responsible for so much harm to women. Not that it gets to claim exclusive copyright on that, it's just a variation on a theme. Blaming all women for all time for the actions of one fictional woman thousands of years ago is asinine. Mythology is not an excuse to treat other people poorly. It's just not. While not across the board, the development of settled agriculture and permanent cities led to many cultures becoming male-dominated. In this case, it is primarily for inheritance, and we'll see the shift from the firstborn to the firstborn male later on. This also becomes a highly militant culture, which also tends to push women lower in the social hierarchy, though not always. Patrilineal societies often exert high control over their female members when birth control is not available. The only way to control the genetics of offspring is to control the entire woman. All that said, depending on the denomination, interpretations on how to apply this social hierarchy vary regarding this. Everything from the highly restrictive, women are the soulless property of their closest male relatives, to the egalitarian, women are humans with free will and can do everything every other human does. One of the top reasons that I left Christianity is because, as a meticulously obedient child, I listened carefully to the words being spoken in the churches I attended, and I watched the people around me. I thought about the words and what they meant on a practical level. One minister espoused the umbrella of protection, citing Genesis 3:16, and encouraged a woman to stay with her abusive husband. As a 5- and 6-year-old, I watched, week after week, as her bruises became harder to hide under her makeup. I watched that horrible man puff up with pride, being told he was righteous for kicking the crap out of his wife and children. and then he broke her arm and busted her cheek. Here's your future if you stay, little girl. F that, my friends. F the God that told that lie, and the unjust punishment that he laid on Eve and her progeny so men could have an excuse to be cruel. And F that lie, too. Some stories, no matter how entertaining they are, lead to a whole lot of no good. Questions. Do you think that the man and the woman were culpable for their snacky snack actions? Do you think that the punishments for the three were just or not? What were you told original sin was? Were you told it was nudity, or were you told it was disobedience? How has this part of the story positively or negatively affected your own life? I want to thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Secular Scriptures. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. If you've left Christianity, tell me about a defining moment of that decision. Share your thoughts on this tale in the comments below. I hope you'll join me next time on the Secular Scriptures for Genesis chapter 4. You jealous, bro?